Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to our Earth Day celebration. It is my honor to introduce our Vice Provost of Global Futures, Dr. Peter Schlosser.
We'd like to welcome all of you to the Julie and Wrigley Global Futures Laboratory here in our headquarters, the Walton Center for Planetary Health, for our celebration of the 53rd, actually, annual Earth Day. Most of you know that, but just to remind you that it's half a century, actually, since this movement started. So during today's event, we will have discussions around water, decision-making, and the critical issues we all face now and into the future, and how youth leaders are addressing those issues. And in a moment, we will have the highlight of this morning. We will hear a special address by Arizona Governor Katie Hobbs. Just to put things into context, as we look towards the future, days like Earth Day remind us to look a little bit back to our past. Earth Day 1970 was a recognition of a developing real danger for the future of our planet. It was the response, the immediate response to a massive oil spill off the coast of Santa Barbara, which was witnessed among many others by Senator Gaylord Nelson from Wisconsin, who, inspired by the student anti-war movement at that time, felt a sense of urgency to pay attention to these issues of the environment and to act. And people did act. When the senator, together with Congressman Peter McCloskey and Dennis Hayes, organized the first Earth Day in 1970, 20 million Americans demonstrated across the United States. It was followed by a quick succession by the creation of Environmental Protection Agency, the Clean Air Act, Clean Water Act, and the Endangered Species Act, among many others. At the time, these were absolutely significant accomplishments and bipartisan successes. In hindsight, with our growing depth of insight and knowledge about the pressures we have placed on many parts of our planet and its life-supporting systems, we know that the flurry of activity in the early 1970s was significant, but not enough. We have managed to develop problems faster than our ability to solve them and put mechanisms in place to manage them. Humankind is today in a more precarious situation than it was 50 years ago. We are what I often call in negative time. We are missing the targets we have set for ourselves through initiatives such as the Sustainable Development Goals or the Paris Accord. Both were launched about 8 years ago in 2015. So while the effects of global change are felt around the world, and among that, climate change, water issues, food security, all the issues that you're well aware of, there are regions that are hit harder than others. And Arizona is such a hotspot where rising temperatures and dwindling water resources pose significant challenges for those who have to make critical decisions for a future in which our state can thrive. And clearly, our governor is at the center of having to make many of these critical decisions. So the urgency to act is still growing. Earth Day is an annual reminder that we need to rethink our trajectory and act faster. So with that, let me welcome Governor Katie Hobbs. We are really pleased, Governor, that you join us in the Walton Center for Planetary Health to celebrate Earth Day 2023. Governor Hobbs was born and raised in Arizona and is a dedicated public servant. She put herself through college at Northern Arizona University and graduate school at Arizona State University. She graduated with a combination of work study and scholarship, and then immediately started helping everyday Arizonans as a social worker. Her first job out of college was working with youth experiencing homelessness in Phoenix, and she helped run one of the largest domestic abuse shelters in the country. In her time as a social worker and running a domestic violence shelter, Governor Hobbs saw firsthand the price Arizonans pay when their elected leaders fail to address the problems people face day in and day out. It was these experiences that led her to seek public office. She served in the Arizona House of Representatives, the Arizona Senate, as the Secretary of State before being sworn in as governor on January 2 this year, 2023. So Governor Hobbs knows firsthand that government only works well when it is led well. For her, that means valuing transparency and accountability and focusing on common needs to create opportunities for all. And clearly the issues that we are addressing today fall into the center of these topics. So please join me in welcoming Governor Hobbs and invite her to the podium.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for having me at the Global Futures Earth Day celebration. I am delighted to be here and grateful to Arizona State University for inviting me to welcome you all this beautiful morning. When Earth Day was established in 1970, there were few statutory and regulatory mechanisms to protect our nation's air, water, and land. Here in Arizona, the Department of Water Resources, Department of Environmental Quality, and so many other critical state, tribal, and local agencies that protect our natural resources didn't exist. That first Earth Day marked a growing acknowledgement by the government that we, humanity, are not separate from nature, but rather part of it. That our collective success and prosperity depends on a flourishing, thriving natural world. Of course, today, that inextricable relationship between humanity and our planet is ever more filled with tension. Here in Arizona, we face a multitude of compounding challenges accelerated by climate change. Despite a brief reprieve from this year's wet winter, the Southwest endures a long-term drought that began 2 decades ago. Our state's share of the Colorado River has already been drastically cut by 21% of our annual water use. Groundwater supplies are diminishing, and even in some active management areas. And throughout the West, even when we receive the same amount of snowpack, there is less water for our communities as higher temperatures increase evaporation. Wildfires grow hotter and more destructive. They're encroaching upon the Sonoran Desert, driven by invasive species, threatening the saguaro and other native desert wildlife. Poor air quality increases infant mortality rates, asthma attacks, and cardiovascular disease. These impacts are especially felt in communities of color and other underserved communities. These are some of the most pressing crises facing our state, our region, and our world. And these crises are only getting more intense. And the only way through them is together. So this Earth Day, I am here to tell you how my administration is acting on climate change so that we can join forces and work together. I have established the first Office of Resiliency, directed by proud ASU alumna Marin Mahoney over here. The Office of This office is tasked with leading on the many federal grant opportunities to upgrade our infrastructure, set and achieve our clean energy goals, and address environmental inequities that so many Arizonans live with every day. We engage regularly in ongoing productive negotiations with our fellow Lower Colorado River Basin states. Together, we will achieve a long-term agreement on Colorado River water allocations. Next month, I will announce the Water Policy Council, a solutions-oriented body with representatives from a multitude of sectors throughout our state. Together, the council While recognizing that we have difficult decisions ahead of us, we'll work towards the creation and implementation of meaningful, long-term groundwater management policies. And today, I am announcing my support for President Biden to designate the Grand Canyon Area National Monument to protect it from future damage and exploitation. Together, Arizonans can ensure the Grand Canyon finally receives the protections it deserves. And this is just the start. We have so much work to do, and we can only do it together. My administration is already meeting with and working closely with our state universities who have been true leaders on climate change, research, and solutions. I encourage students to look to the many employment opportunities at our state agencies where together we can grow a more resilient Arizona. I look forward to seeing what I know that Arizona can do in the face of our shared crises when we work together. Thank you so much.
So as you have heard from the governor herself, the issues that we will address today during our sessions are also at the heart of the problems that are seen and that are facing government and its entities to really come up with the kind of decisions that are both addressing immediate problems, but also getting ready for the long-term changes that we are all in for. We are now moving on to discussing one of the issues that the governor has highlighted, which is water availability, water quality. But before we go into that topic, would like to make an announcement about an event that will come up next Tuesday, which is the launch of the Arizona Water Innovation Initiative. It's the kickoff meeting of that initiative. Will take place between 2:30 and 4 p.m. here in this auditorium. And you all are invited to attend this event. The Arizona Water Innovation Initiative is a statewide project that is led by the Julie and Wrigley Global Futures Laboratory in close collaboration with the IRA Fulton Schools of Engineering. And it was enabled thanks to a $40 million investment from the state of Arizona. That also tells you that actions that are taken by the state are relying on work that you all are doing. And that puts a great opportunity in our hand, but at the same time, a real big responsibility. So we are actually going into a new phase of our so-called solution-oriented research activities. Through this initiative, ASU works with industrial, municipal, agricultural, tribal, and international partners to rapidly accelerate and deploy new approaches and technology for water management, including conservation, augmentation, desalination, efficiency, infrastructure, and reuse. You can register online and just look for the announcements that are actually everywhere on our webpage, etc. And Dave White, who is sitting here in the front row, and Sarah Porter are leading that initiative, and I would like to thank them for the leadership on that. So I would like to invite now Amber Wutich and Jay Famiglietti to join me for a discussion about water issues around Arizona. Whichever way. Just to set the stage a little bit, we are living on a water planet. So why are we talking about water problems? 70% of Earth's surface is covered by water. And if you look at the depth of the ocean underneath that water surface, it's about 3,700 meters deep. If you look at the average elevation of land, it's only about 840 meters. So plenty of water by volume. Sadly, 97% of that water is so saline that you could not use it for drinking and many of the other uses. Of the other 3%, 2/3 are locked up, frozen in high latitudes and high altitudes. But even that 1% of the total water should actually be enough to meet our demand. So the question then is, why are we struggling with the availability of water? To look at this and related questions, we have Jay and Amber for a conversation here about water. Jay is a hydrologist, science communicator, and global futures professor. He is professor emeritus at the University of Saskatchewan, where he was executive director of the Global Institute of Water Security. He was the founding chief scientist of the tech startup Waterplan, an advanced climate platform to monitor and mitigate water risk, which he continues to advise. Amber is an ethnographer and methodologist with expertise on water insecurity. Her 2 decades of community-based fieldwork explored how people respond individually and collectively to extremely water-scarce conditions. She is president's professor and director of the Center for Global Health at Arizona State University. So let's start with a little bit about yourself. Amber, what got you into the field of looking at water? What interested you in that topic, and how are you approaching that?
Hi, good morning, everyone. I think like a lot of students here, I wanted to work on a problem that was really important. And to my mind, there's nothing more important than water. I started my work as a researcher on the Cochabamba water war. If you've never heard of it, there's a great movie, Ending in the Rain, that got an Oscar. And it was a situation where water scarce people in Cochabamba fought against privatization, won the war, but their water situation was just as bad before they started fighting. And so I went there to study and help the problem. And that work informs what we'll discuss today, but I was hired from Bolivia to ASU because Arizona is one of the most interesting, exciting, and visionary water scarce places in the world. So that's how I got to be here.
Great. Jay, I know that you were in that business for a long time. You were one of the first to look actually from space onto water. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Thanks, Peter. It's great to be here this morning, and happy Earth Day, everyone. I started thinking about remote sensing when I was in graduate school. I actually did a year of graduate school in geophysics before I switched over to water. And that's when I first became aware of remote sensing. When I was then started working on my PhD, there was a lot of interest in remote sensing of soil moisture, which is critically important for agriculture. And for what we call the interactions between the land and the atmosphere that control weather and climate. So it was a gradual thing, but the thing that really got me into, many of you know I work with a satellite mission called GRACE, which has allowed us to see how water availability is changing around the world. And what really got me into that was my time at the University of Texas at Austin, where the PI was based. And I had, it was just a great opportunity to do interdisciplinary research and work with faculty members in another field. It was quite challenging because I didn't understand the language and the mathematics, but it was worth the risk. And that was a game changer for me.
Mm. Where do you see the most critical issues with water these days? We clearly have pressure on 2 main fronts, if you want to simplify that much: availability and quality. And then, of course, there is also the element of the just distribution of water. So where do you think the major issues are?
I'm going to give you a very personal perspective on this. I'm an anthropologist. My interest is in human survival. And so for me, the most pressing issue is that we are not making decisions that maximize human health and survival around water. And so there are other incredibly pressing problems that interlink with that. But we know that 100 years ago, we extended centralized piped water systems, and it was the biggest innovation in public health that ever happened. We are sliding backwards, and we're seeing increases in infectious disease, mental ill health, and other health problems that are indicative of that. So I'm focused on that challenge.
So just following up on that, sliding backward, is that neglect of infrastructure in part? Is it, where are the major pressure points that make us slide back?
The collaborative group that I lead has made the argument that there are three main pressures. One of them, yes, is that we have not adequately maintained the infrastructure. A second problem is that the infrastructure was designed for certain sets of climate stressors that are not the conditions we're living under today, right? So it's not just maintenance, but actually it can't survive, it can't function as designed under these stressors. But then on top of that, because of climate change and other problems, humans are moving to places where we had not planned for them to live en masse. So those three things together, decline of infrastructure, disaster-related stressors, and the movement of human populations to survive under climate conditions are creating this crisis.
Jay, if you're looking at the basic availability of water in a changing world, where are how did we get into that situation of being pressured in so many areas by overuse of the resource? And clearly, you know, what you saw early on was depression cones from withdrawal, but there are other issues that are facing us. So could you give the audience a bit of a sense of where, in terms of water delivery to the surface of the planet and from groundwater, where are the biggest pressure points?
From below. So first of all, you know, to sort of set the stage there. So one of the things that I work on is really mapping out how water availability is changing. And there are broad patterns of high latitudes getting wetter and low latitudes getting wetter because of climate change predicted by climate models, and mid latitudes getting drier. But they're sprinkled on top of that backdrop. There are all these hot spots for too much or for too little water. And many of the hot spots for too little water correspond to the world's major aquifer systems. And we use that groundwater. Groundwater provides about 50% of the water for irrigation. So we're using a lot of groundwater. Much of it is non-renewable for food production. So the hot spots are mainly the food producing regions. And so in the United States, it's here, it's the Ogallala Aquifer, specifically the Southern High Plains. It's the Central Valley in California, but it's really happening on every continent. How do we get here? Groundwater's been poorly managed around the world, if managed at all in the developing world. So, you know, look at Arizona. Only really half of the groundwater is managed. Look at California. The Sustainable Groundwater Management Act was only passed in 2014 and still isn't fully implemented. And while it's in the implementation phase, I just had a paper come out just before Christmas that showed that groundwater depletion is actually accelerating. So it's the lack of management around the world that's really gotten us into this situation, especially with groundwater. And, you know, I wish Governor Hobbs were here because we could give her another round of applause for the interest that she has immediately shown in her first week. And she repeated it again here today about groundwater management in Arizona.
So most of you know that, but just to put a little bit of information behind what Jay just said, non-renewable. A lot of the aquifers that we are tapping have water that is thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, sometimes millions of years old. And that is withdrawn now on a time scale of years to decades. So that's really that mismatch.
Right. Yeah, we say that it's, you know, taken hundreds of thousands of years, tens of thousands to hundreds of thousands, millions of years, geologic time to put into storage, and we're burning through it in a century, on human time scale.
And there are, of course, if we are looking at water and we are looking at projections forward, there are areas who are dry, who become drier. There are areas who are wet, who are becoming wetter. So somebody might look at that and say, Why are you not just taking water from where you have it in abundance or overabundance actually, and make sure that you get it to the areas where you have too little? Why can't we do that?
Well, so moving water around. So we already do that, right? We've been moving water around. You know, I just flew in was up in Canada and flying back down and flying across the state and seeing the Central Arizona project. And of course, lived in California for many years, which is completely plumbed with canals and aqueducts. So sometimes we get a little bit uptight about the idea of moving water around. Let me say this. We have a big country. And we're fortunate in our country to have places that are wet and places that are dry. It's small countries. Imagine if the United States were just Arizona. We'd really be in trouble. So I think as part of the Arizona Water Initiative, we have to really explore all these ideas, even ones that we might not support personally. We still have to be thinking about, is it feasible to move water around? When is it going to be cost effective? Is it ever going to be environmentally safe? What are the other alternatives? What can we do on the demand side? What can we do to reduce demand rather than think about supply side solutions? So just say, pipelines are moving water around within states and within the Colorado River Basin is easier than in the rest of the country.
Moving water around reminds me of one of my first encounters with that problem when I was actually on an icebreaker tours in Antarctica, and there was a group on board trying to figure out if you can wrap big icebergs that are breaking off the ice sheet and tow them into mid-latitudes, because the amount of water in these icebergs is just tremendous, but the technical challenge was simply, and the cost was simply not there. So Amber, you mentioned the changing conditions, climate change. We heard about agriculture, public health comes in. So food is a bit of a connecting piece there. So if you're looking at public health, food security, and water, where do you see we can actually make progress in making sure that all of these elements are coming together? Because we do know that agriculture takes too much water in many areas where it's done. We often also have a selection of crops that are not matching the geography. So if you're looking at that changing landscape, where do you see areas where we could actually make changes and start to move into a better direction?
Okay. I'm an anthropologist, so that means when I answer a question, I'm not looking at 30 or 50 years of history, I'm looking at thousands of years of history. So I'm going to say it openly. When we think about the agriculture of this ecology and how people have survived, we want to look back, for example, to the Hohokam who lived here hundreds of years ago, and their descendants, the Tohono O'odham, still live here today. They are the ones who created the irrigation in the cap canals, like the one right here outside. They're the ones who figured out how to move water through this valley. Right? And they also figured out how to farm under adverse climatic conditions in this valley. So the Hohokam and every other society that's ever faced severe drought uses two main mechanisms to cope: migration and exchange. And so when we think about agriculture, thinking about exchange is key. When I came here from Bolivia, I worked with Dave White, and we were bringing water managers into the decision theater to talk about, now that we have these new climate projections, what are we going to do? And I have to tell you, I had a panic attack because it was like sitting inside a spaceship when I had been sitting on a rock doing interviews for several years. It was quite the change. But I was excited to see that 20 years ago, people were already modeling out what were the implications for agriculture of this expected climate change. So we've known for decades that we would need to change the way that we were handling agriculture in the state. One of the terms people use to describe this is called agricultural retirement. So that means doing less agriculture, pulling back that water and investing it in other industries. But it also means conserving water in the ways that we do agriculture. So I would just say we obviously need to continue to grow crops, and we need to continue to push forward on changing the industries that support human life in Arizona, but also shifting to less water consumptive forms of agriculture.
So how do you get, if you would shift agricultural practices, for example, if you would shift agriculture as an industry here in Arizona, that clearly would immediately have implications on social dynamics. How are you getting into a situation where you can make decisions that allow such a transition without major setbacks in the societal structures?
Yeah, I think it's clearly unavoidable that there is going to have to be cultural and economic evolution in Arizona. So we need to collaboratively talk to all the stakeholders and think about, what sorts of futures do you imagine would be productive for your children and your children's children, and how do we get there, right? And so some of it can be voluntary, but some of it will be forced because the cost of water will increase. Right? Particularly as we think of exploiting new water sources, water will get more and more expensive. And so the kinds of economic propositions that exist under agriculture right now wouldn't be economically feasible under new water regimes. So some of it can be done through, if we're forward thinking, as Arizona has always been, we'll do it collaboratively before we're forced to. But if not, the economic proposition will force us to make these changes.
Do you mind if I jump in on that? Yeah, so great question. And one of the things that I think about, and you sort of alluded to it, Amber, again, over sort of anthropologic timescales. But I really think about the shocks to the food system, right? Food systems. And right now we're optimized around our major food producing regions. And so that's here, that's the Southern High Plains, that's in California. And as that water disappears, we have to really be thinking about what are those shocks that are going to reach. Remember, it's transportation, it's packaging, it's the workers, it's everything. And I don't think that we have, on a national level, I don't think we really are prepared to deal with that. So it does get back to this. In my work, shows very clearly, this aquifer running out of water at this pace, right? This aquifer, California, Central Valley, Arizona, High Plains aquifer. So, we know that we know the rate at which it's running out, and so we need to we have numbers, we have targets that we can try to use to minimize groundwater depletion, so that we can sustain our food systems right where they are. Because if we don't, then we'll have these shocks. We're going to move water to the food, or we're going to move the food to the water. What are we going to do? And we need to be planning from now.
Picking up on that, of course, there are issues that are local that we see. And you mentioned some of them, as St. Joachim Valley, there's the Ogallala Aquifer, Pannonian Basin, Paris Basin, you go to Beijing, all major food production areas that are facing a situation of less water resources because they pump primarily from groundwater. So now all of a sudden you're also not just looking regionally or nationally, you also are looking internationally, because food production and food exchange is actually virtual water exchange. So where will that actually, if we are looking at a future on that global level, where will the main pressure points develop in your view?
Well, I think they've already developed. And so there's maybe two parts to that answer. One follows on what Amber was saying about, we have a history of exchange. If we could all get along around the world, we could exchange food and everything would be great. We could grow this crop over here, we could grow that crop over there, and everything would be great. But we can't do that because we want to be, as a nation, food secure. We have to really be careful about, so I just want to focus on what I call the alfalfa problem. It's an example of a crop that is grown. We use alfalfa for hay, and it's hay to feed cows. And at one point I heard a statistic, 75%, it might not be valid anymore, but maybe 5 years ago, it was accurate. 75% of the water in that California gets from the Colorado River Basin is used to grow alfalfa, and 75% of that is exported. And at that time it was to China. So I think we really have to be carefully thinking about, since we don't play nice with the rest of the world, and we can't just, we don't hold hands, move food around in ways that it would be great if we did. Then I think we need to be thinking very carefully about our crop selections and how, we're sort of at the cliff, and we have to make a decision now about what we're going to do. And so, to answer your question, this is the hot spot.
And
Yep.
just to add to that,
Go ahead.
as Jay alluded, we had some options to make the decisions that wouldn't have forced us onto this path, but now we're on it. And so now we'll have to make some harder decisions, right? We could have slowed down climate change. We didn't do that. So now we're making these other choices. And it's unavoidable that we are going to have to make some hard decisions, right? There are some easy wins. We could eat a lot less beef, right? We might decide we're not going to have winter lettuce anymore. So something we can easily convert certain crops that are very water consumptive to other choices. But another choice that our colleague, Dr. Melissa Nelson, has brought up is the advantages of hyperlocal food systems. And I really want to stress that I do not mean that as an individual choice intervention. I mean that as a systemic intervention, right? It's like you can't change these systems by just buying more locally. It has to be systemic, but getting people to lower the stress on global food chains by eating locally and growing crops that can grow in this ecology can help. It can be a much bigger piece of the puzzle than it is.
And that's why I go to the farmer's market on Saturdays.
Very good. So, Amber, following on what you said, clearly we know quite a bit of what can be done, what can be changed, what, to the best of our knowledge, would lead to a better situation with respect to water. How can we convince people to make these choices?
It's my perspective that we are under considerable pressure here in the lower basin to start to make some new choices. So quite often for humans, you want convenience, you want something that accumulates prestige, you want something that's cost effective, and you're going to make individual choices that align in those ways. As there was more and more institutional and systemic pressure down a different pathway, it gets easier to make those choices because they're less costly. And I would say we're optimally in that position right now. We have a lot of choices on the table, but we also have a lot of pressure to do things in new ways.
How much pressure do we need? Do we have to get to a crisis, or are we actually able to turn that corner before we are in the crisis, where choices are not, can have much more side effects than if we are acting earlier?
Okay, I will give a hopeful answer, and I look very much to my colleague, Dr. Sarah Porter, who's the director of the Kyle Center for Water Policy, in thinking about what the choice environment looks like in Arizona right now, but also as someone who's lived here for 20 years and who studied the history of the basin. I think we are people who have made good choices when under pressure. I'm very hopeful about our ability to respond positively to the pressure we're under right now. I hope and think we don't need more, but if we do need more, we're going to get it. So that's fine too.
So
What's your take, Jay?
my take is that the crisis is here, and that the only way path forward is what we call a transdisciplinary pathway. And that means not only interdisciplinary across campus, but working with the stakeholders, working with the governor's office, the Department of Water Resources, the nonprofits, right? The indigenous tribes. We have to come together and find an equitable and just pathway forward. And we can do that. And now I think we have the resources to start doing that with the water initiative. So we have a lot of work ahead. What I like to say is, like, we're not really going to change global change, and we're not really going to solve the global water crisis, but we can manage our way through, right? We can find those management solutions that are going to sustain us for generations. And, when we talk about food, I always like to say this as well. I love to eat, but, I want my great grandchildren to be eating as well. And we do have some important choices to make on diet and the kind of things that, we're growing and why we're growing them.
So it's a great point. Just a quick follow-up. So the crisis is here, but are we seeing it? It's a little bit like our view book, right? You're looking at me, but are you seeing me?
Yeah, that's a good question. And so that's sort of a social science question. What do people see? right? When they look out there, if you're turning on your tap and you're going to the grocery store and everything's there, you know, I get that from my family. I mean, even my own son, okay, who lives in LA and lived through so many drought phases. He'll say like, why should I care about Lake Mead? Like, dude, where did I go wrong? So, no, it's really, I find it to be really a social science question. We have been doing, you know, you mentioned that I do science communication. You know, but the audience doesn't know. I've done like everything that you could possibly do. And I'm not sure it's had much impact. But you know, that doesn't dissuade me from getting, you know, and bringing this, you know, same sort of spirit here to ASU. Doesn't dissuade me from wanting to do that communication, really, you know, sitting down with I've got a whole new set of stakeholders to get introduced to, but show them the work, show them what I see, try to get them to see it through my eyes a little bit. Maybe we find that common ground and raise public awareness.
How are you looking at that?
I have so many thoughts on this issue. So as a social scientist, what I would say is it would not be optimal to push people into a crisis frame for dealing with this problem. And there are a lot of reasons for that. For one, as social scientists, we know how humans respond to natural hazards and disasters. This is settled science. People come together. They're hyper pro-social. They try really hard to solve the problem together for about a few days, weeks, or months, and then the society re-separates into social structures where people are at different levels of advantage. And then the society reforms moving forward. So having a crisis really only gives you a very short time to fix something. It's not a long-term strategy. What you want to do is hit people when they're still in a place to make positive, pro-social, long-term decisions and do it that way. And what I want to say is here, I think we are very much in that space. What Jay is saying is that people don't sense on a day-to-day basis that they're in crisis, and that's optimal. We don't want our society to feel like it's in crisis. Actually, we've just had that and it felt terrible, right? And not only that, but our economic model is really predicated on us attracting people here, wanting people to come here to settle new great industries and tourism. I don't think we want to deter that kind of growth either, that economic growth necessarily. So where we are is optimal. My expertise is on the most water insecure communities, and for people whose needs are not being met, it is a crisis. So when we think about Rio Verde foothills, who heard about that situation? Okay, the water hounds in the room. So that is a community here in Metro Phoenix that was cut off from its water because they were on hauled water and their source dried up, and it hit the national news. It was in the New York Times. This is a problem because people in Rio Verde foothills are a part of your community, and we have a duty to each other to ensure everyone's survival, but it's also a problem for the PR for our state. This is not the place where we want to be, right? So we need to make decisions that safeguard our fellow citizens, but also safeguard our future growth and economic well-being.
So how are you getting this message across with the background that you read locally, nationally? The Colorado River is the US river that has the highest risk. There are water cuts. We heard from the governor, 20%. In addition, Dave White tells us all the time, how Colorado River is actually, not increasing our water security. You hear other things along these lines. So looking from the outside, why would somebody not say, well, maybe if I have options, I'm not going there? Because you seem to be optimistic. And I get that point of the immediate crisis, and you don't want to be in that, and because it fades off fast. But let's say a state of high alert, that we should be in. How can we actually keep a hopeful message with that background of constant messaging that we are running out of water?
Sure. I think the answer is don't talk to me. No, just kidding. So I think one of the things that we probably want to work on with the water initiative is that messaging. What's the balance of we can do this if we all work together versus, okay, this is an urgent and huge problem. And so therefore we all need to work together. But if we all work together, then we can manage our way through this. And just one example is, we've talked a lot about agriculture because agriculture uses most of the water, but so that's an opportunity because even just a small change will free up a tremendous amount of water. So I think that there's huge opportunities there. So, another thing I think becomes very important is in terms of public awareness, are the graphics and the visualizations. And so some of the work that the Kyle Center is doing has been great. So, that kind of information, that we can get that out there, help educate the public, but at the same time, the message, no one wants to hear the we're doomed message anymore because they know we're doomed, right? So let's tell them that there are, because it's true, okay, we're on this. Right, we're on this. We can manage our way through this together. We've got this.
On the messaging, let me just put another element into the discussion. So there was a report that was highly publicized in national media that the last 2 decades, the last 22 years, were the driest in the last 1,200 years. Then we get a wet winter, and everybody says, "What's the problem?" So how are you dealing with these kind of situations where weather and climate is utterly confused?
So let me just jump on that one first, because then I had published a paper just before Christmas that said, this is the driest California has ever been in the history of life in California. And then boom, the wettest winter, on record. And I think that is, again, where the data actually show, if you can provide data that major newspapers like the New York Times and the San Francisco Chronicle can publish, they can show that historically, even the wettest winters, when I'm thinking now about groundwater and sort of total availability in Arizona or California, you can show that the wet winters are, and from a water supply perspective, they're great, right? They recharge our reservoirs, they replenish our streams, there are opportunities for groundwater recharge. But their impact is just a few years because we use so much water that, it's sort of like I talk about, when you think about water availability in Arizona or in California, it's sort of like a tennis ball bouncing down the stairs, so it hits a step, bounces up, that's a wet period, then big drop to the next step, and then, bounces up a little bit, that's a wet winter, a couple of wet winters. And so that's what we're doing. So I think we have to socialize that and let people know, it becomes a statewide goal that, okay, we want to change the slope, however we say it, right? We want to decrease that trend. We want to keep that water in the state.
And as you said, don't ask me, I will ask Amber. So how are we doing that?
So humans are really smart and they respond to the signals in their environment. And I think, I'm someone who was educated in the 1990s when there was still some question in the public mind about if climate change existed. And that's over now, right? And so I think people will see, yes, we had a wet winter, but it's like if you earned a lot of income in August, that doesn't make up for the rest of the year, right? And I think people can see there are many, many signals of climate change across the US. And just because we had one good signal, we had one cold winter, we had one good monsoon season, doesn't make up for all the signals they're seeing. And so I think we shouldn't underestimate how smart people are, right? They can see these signals, but they also need a framework in which they can act on them in a productive way. And that's what is our responsibility to do, is to get them that framework. And then the other thing I would just say about Arizona being a hot mess is that I don't see it that way at all. I think if you talk to people who work in the Colorado River Basin or water managers, no one points to Arizona and says, oh, what poorly managed water resources. No, Arizona's historically been a beacon of good management. And furthermore, we are a beacon for the world, not just for the country, because we are learning to manage an extremely hot, extremely water scarce environment, facing down the challenges of climate change and migration and economic growth. And so I'm all in on keeping Arizona as a global beacon of resilience.
So you have a very hopeful message. What would you say to people who are following the news? And there was an assessment a few years ago that said, if we are not changing our ways, not just locally, regionally, but globally, dramatically, Phoenix will look like Baghdad by about 2050. So I think we know, in your, I gather from what you say that there are a lot of things we know how to do. How to get that into people's mind? Where do we have to start actually? What about education? Where would you actually start in the educational system? I sometimes have the feeling we are starting way too late to bring these issues into the thought space of kids who then, sooner than they want to be, are in positions where they have to make decisions.
I'm going to say something very shocking. I am not a believer in the educational model of social change. I don't think we educate our way out of this as a societal problem. I am a believer in a social prestige model of change, which means humans flock to the solution that earns the most money, that gives them the most prestige, that is the most desirable. So when we think about how to change Arizona, how do we increase economic growth and make it a more attractive destination that everybody wants to be in? That's the kind of solution that humans like. Humans, look, again, I lived through the 1990s. Nobody wanted to be educated. We see where educating people about climate change and trying to get them to stop using their cars got us. It got us nowhere, right? So to me, education is a tool in that the people in this room who are students are training to be national and state and world leaders in water management. That is where we make an impact through education, by training the best people in the world who develop the best technologies and the best social interventions. But general education as an intervention has not got legs.
Oh, okay. So I have to, and I'm not looking for applause, but I have to 100% disagree with that. I mean,
All right, now we are getting there.
I think we need to start in preschool. I think we need to start in the womb. I mean, and I disagree. I think it's had a huge impact. I mean, public awareness. I mean, we're on track to have more EVs, and we're moving towards renewable power and all that stuff. I mean, I agree. Yeah, people want to come to a bright, shiny Arizona, but I'm sorry, my face is too much in the data every day to that's not the reality. The reality is one that is extremely challenging. And the more we can do to make our future, to educate, I love the ASU model about the democratization of education. People need to be educated about what is going on. And I think only then will they make, not only that, people are certainly driven by their pocketbooks and job opportunities, right? So I agree on that. But, I used to finish my talks with a quote or, just a phrase that said something like, if people really understood the sources of where their water is coming from and how those things are changing, then they would accept the need they would understand what was going on and would accept the need for better management. And so, I drifted away from that, but I'm kind of, for this talk anyway, for this presentation, I'm back to it just as a nice counterbalance here to your comments.
I find you to be even more hopeful than I am.
Maybe a combination of the two is needed to do that. So from the educational aspect to the communication aspect, we are used to be asked to academia, to be asked to give answers to certain problems with certainty. And if we see then a few years down the road that we might be 10, 20% off, which for a natural system is virtually nothing, we are told, well, you told us that and you didn't know and your models are wrong and we cannot believe you, etc. So what do we have to do to bring across incomplete knowledge with error envelopes that people understand, so that we are not getting into that trap of saying you told that and now we are 10% off, so you're wrong?
Well, I think in our case on the water side, the observations are there enough so that people recognize that we really haven't been, that we've been within the error bars. For example, like they know if their wells are going dry. They know if they look up in them. I used to say this all the time in California, you look up in the mountains, there's no snow there, right? You look at the reservoirs, you look at Lake Mead, right? You know that's happening. What's his name, Tim Barnett, the guy who wrote the paper, When Will Lake Mead Go Dry? He wrote that paper like 10 or 15 years ago. Guy Scripps, he's passed away. But Yeah, I mean, so what? He's might have been off by a few years, but the general trend is there. So that's how I feel about water. We know that the quality is not good. We can test it, right? We can see these things in ways which other climate stuff is a little bit more nebulous, right? Like, what's the temperature going to be? And did it change that much? Did it not change that much? Some of these things we can see. We can see sea level rising. We can see the groundwater levels dropping. We can see that there's no water in Lake Mead. So we're on a little better ground, I think, compared to broader climate.
Yeah, of course, precipitation minus evaporation is a difficult one. But anyway, so Emma, what's your take on that?
Well, as you mentioned, I'm the director of the Center for Global Health here at ASU, and we've just been through a very wild public science communication ride with the COVID-19 crisis. And we can all think of moments around vaccines and mask use and long COVID where the science was not 100% borne out. We thought a certain thing would work. We thought we should watch our groceries in bleach, and that didn't turn out to be the thing, right? And so there was a considerable loss of public trust around the public health apparatus because of these difficulties in communicating science. This is a place where I feel like public education has an enormous impact. Every time I see in a newspaper, science says you should eat more veggies, or it's like, science doesn't say anything. Individual scientists collectively push forward the frontiers of knowledge, right? And so we never know the answer. We make our best guess iteratively together. And so this is a place where general education is important on what is science, but also working with science communicators like journalists and being really careful that they convey that, this is our provisional answer right now, and the methods will be better and the theory will be better next year and next year and next year, right? Because we're making decisions using a moving target, but the general public, I think, doesn't always fully understand that.
And so how can we help the public to understand better?
I mean, obviously, I think everyone, you're so careful about that. You work so hard to do it. But I think also thinking about how are people getting information and how can we impact those points of information, like working closely with journalists is very important.
Yeah, so I'm going to follow up on that. So that's one area where I have invested a lot of time is relationships with journalists. And those relationships are so critical because then, you've got a trusted relationship. You can work with the reporter to make sure the message gets out, it's not overstated. And that becomes very important. And, I think we're doing a great job with that here at ASU. We just absolutely have to continue. So looking to the media to amplify, right, to amplify that message and disseminate it across, no one's going to read our research paper. I mean, I'll read your research paper, but right, we need the media as partners.
We are reaching the end of the session. So what I would like to suggest is that each of you give a little bit of a summary in terms of where do you see Arizona going? What is the timeline on which we have to act, and are we on track without taking too much out of Tuesday's session?
Since you're the optimist, clearly, Amber, we should probably finish with you. Is that okay? So I will say, so remember, I'm a newcomer to Arizona, although I've spent most of my career in the West. Even in Canada, I was in the West. I always lived in the dry part of the country, or dry part of North America. I think we're in a great position here at ASU, just given the vision of our president, the vision for the Global Futures Laboratory. We're in a place that can take action, that can work in a transdisciplinary setting, can do things at the pace and the scale that are required to deal with the water issue. So I think. And with the funding for the water initiative and the support of the governor, we're aligned. So I think we're in excellent shape.
Very good, Amber. I think he's moving towards your optimistic position here.
Well, then I'm going to flip it up. So right. So when we take a long look at this ecology, we know that those two main tools, exchange and migration, sometimes have to be used in ways that aren't great for humans. This valley has been significantly depopulated as a result of drought through human history. And if we don't make wise choices, that will have to happen again. So when is the time to act? Well, when we made Earth Day 50 years ago, it was now. And when we discovered 30 or 40 years ago that climate change was happening, it was now. And 15 years ago, when we knew that the water agreements that we had in Arizona weren't going to cut it, it was now. It's still now. Every single day is a chance to act. And the longer we wait, the more our decisions narrow down to depopulation, right? So the time is now.
Okay, with that message of both hope and the message that there is urgency, there's no time to be wasted, I would like to thank Jay and Amber for a very inspiring conversation. We are now leading over to the second segment of this Earth Day celebration, which will be on perspectives by our youth. As most of you know, the original Earth Day was envisioned as a campus teach-in led by youth activist Dennis Hayes. And he was recruited by Senator Gaylord Nelson. Today, we will hear from youth leaders from the College of Global Future students who are working for thriving futures here on campus, as well as in their communities. Our Students Are Changemakers panel will be moderated by Elizabeth Quigley. Elizabeth, who uses she, her pronouns, is an undergraduate honor student at ASU, graduating next month with degrees in sustainability and supply chain management. She is passionate about empowering individuals and communities to create a positive change they want to see in the world. She has been a strong proponent for youth, education, and leadership in sustainability through her work with organizations such as the Rob and Melanie Walton Sustainability Teachers Academy, Turn It Around cards, Changemaker Central at ASU, and the Sustainability Alliance at ASU. Would like to invite Elizabeth to the front here and introduce her panel and start the exchange.
Okay, testing. Thank you for that introduction, Peter. Try and get into these chairs, not meant for 5'1". All right. Good morning, all. Happy Earth Day Eve. It is wonderful to be with you all today. We have a very exciting panel coming up with our student leaders from the university who are doing the most to create sustainable change, not only here, but in the local and global communities as well. Achieving change for sustainability is an incredibly complex and challenging issue to tackle. And yet, here in our midst, we have so many student leaders that are dedicating their educations, their time, and their futures to tackling these issues. It is important that we take the time today to not only recognize the work that our student leaders are doing here today, but to continue these conversations, to continue this recognition, and to find what we can do here at ASU and in our communities and beyond to empower these students, these youth, to create a difference here and beyond. It is important that we recognize that our students, our youth, are not only the leaders of the future, but the leaders of today as well. So with that, I would like to invite my panelists to come up and join me at the front. Right, to start with introductions, to my left, we have Kylie Brown, who uses she, they pronouns, who moved to Arizona from rural Ohio to study sustainability and political science here at ASU. She strives to improve sustainability education within communities, bringing the mindfulness and competency needed to build upon resiliency, and she focuses her research on challenging and rebuilding current economic, political, and social infrastructure. Kylie is actively involved in Changemaker Central, volunteers in community outreach, the Sustainability Alliance, and undergraduate research. Welcome, Kylie. Next, we have Kennedy Gardine, who is a sophomore at ASU, pursuing a BA in Sustainability and minor in Urban Planning. She's very involved on campus and in the community. She serves as the president of Global Futures College Council and regularly volunteers with the Greater Phoenix Urban League and Global Shapers Phoenix Hub. She aspires to use green urban development to improve the resilience and well-being of minority communities by addressing resource inequities and housing affordability. Welcome, Kennedy. Next, we have Mauricio Juarez Leon, who is a youth activist and advocate for sustainability, climate action, and leadership development at local and global levels. He is a founding member of Fridays for Futures Phoenix, advocating for climate action and justice in the greater Phoenix area. He holds leadership roles with various other climate and sustainability groups, including the Honor Society for Sustainability, the Sustainability Alliance at ASU, Campus Student Sustainability Initiatives, Sustainability Buddies, and Access ASU. Mauricio is a second-year student studying sustainability and working towards 2 certificates in energy and sustainability and international business. Welcome, Mauricio. And finally, we have Jordan King, who is a PhD candidate in the School of Sustainability and College of Global Futures. His research focuses on how to cultivate and assess sustainability-oriented learning, particularly the ways that students link inner transformations with systemic change for sustainable futures. He is a founding member of the Greater Phoenix Regional Center of Expertise on Education for Sustainable Development, as well as a graduate research fellow with the Global Council for Science and the Environment. Welcome, Jordan. So to get us started with Kylie, we are here to celebrate on Earth Day, but Earth Day and the events that preceded it and its launch in 1970 happened more than 50 years ago. So does Earth Day still have value with youth? What does Earth Day mean to all of you?
Yeah, thanks for the introduction. I think absolutely Earth Day still has value. It has value for everyone, youth. We all share this earth together. It has value to all of us. And having that recognition, even if it is more centered on just a single day, that's important. But when we look at relative to when it first was established back in the 70s, I think to say if it has the same value, that's more of the question. Because when we think about the advocates and those back when Earth Day was first established, Earth Day was established and that was probably such a huge victory for them. Like I could only imagine being on like the forefront of that and celebrating the first Earth Day, the first 5 Earth Days. But if for us today to have that same excitement about Earth Day, that would mean that we're not making any progress. Because I think the first Earth Day was not meant as the be all end all. We've made it, we saved the planet. It's a stepping stone. And so yes, it still has value. And I'm glad that we're here today and we're celebrating this and we're all together. But it can't hold the same value because we're celebrating new things as advocates, as those celebrating the health of our planet. We need to be celebrating new things and growing and taking more steps.
I think it especially has value amongst our youth because especially for me, Earth Day was like one of the first times where I learned about how to like protect the earth, especially in like elementary education. It's where you learn like reduce, reuse, recycle, and those types of things. So I think it does hold a lot of value because students, especially younger people, are introduced to these concepts early on. And it also represents to me just hope. In that sense, I agree with Kylie in that progress needs to be more made and whatnot. But I feel as though this annual event and these people, you guys showing up here today, really gives me hope in the sense that there are people like me who care about my community, who care about protecting the earth in that sense. And we're here together to do this.
I also agree that Earth Day is really important for all of us, especially since back in the 70s, Earth Day was like a huge stepping stone for all of us. But in terms of right now, Earth Day to me means like recognizing environmental issues and that they exist. And I know for the youth, it's kind of really important to know that these issues are real and that they exist. And for me personally, growing up, the first times I've heard about Earth Day was also through the school and elementary and learning about all those those phrases that we would say. But for now, youth and Earth Day are more intertwined than ever. And I think Earth Day definitely has evolved since the 70s. And so learning how to go about Earth Day and how to manage Earth Day within the youth is really, really important, especially now today when climate change is more real than ever.
And I would say, I think Earth Day sort of hits this sweet spot of bringing attention to these issues. Sort of like the last panel talked about of balancing out this sort of deep, enveloping worry and concern about these issues, but also supporting sort of a bold and resilient hope that we can take action and we can sort of promote the type of change that we need. But I think the one thing I would be critical of Earth Day is that we saw in the 70s as this was established, it led to significant policy changes that really helped to guide the environmental movement since that point in time. And if we take Earth Day as a sort of call to action, I think the criticism is in the name of it being Earth Day and thinking about what happens tomorrow and the day after that and the day after that. And that's where we need to think of not only what happens in our educational systems, but also in the types of collective movements we build and how we sustain, and I use that word intentionally, the types of action, knowledge building and capacity building we need to take Earth Day and transition it towards something even more meaningful moving forward.
For sharing. And it's good to know the youth still care about Earth Day, but we definitely need to potentially accelerate across all generations our actions and bring forward the movements that we had in the past. So my next question for all of you is if you could share some of the work you've been doing with sustainability here at ASU or beyond, and how has being at ASU influenced which sustainability issues you're addressing and how you do so?
Yeah, I can start. I know coming from a rural community, I remember in my high school when I first became passionate about sustainability and just resiliency and focusing on these planetary health issues. I remember I was the only one. I grew up in rural Ohio, a community of like less than 1,000 in my town. And I could not articulate to you like the isolation that I felt, or maybe I'm not alone. But it was complete isolation. How I was the only student. I was among this youth population. I was the only one who really cared. And coming to ASU and being with a group of students who are advocates, who care, who are aware, and then also seeing that reflected in the staff and just this program in general, it was so empowering. It was so empowering, and I could not be more thankful for that. And I think that has really helped me in incubating my own sustainability projects. I know I've been doing like some social campaigns with like single-use plastic and just some undergraduate research. I know Katie Hobbs talked about the Grand Canyon, which is so fun because last weekend I actually was in the Grand Canyon doing field research with one of my undergraduate research programs, working with Elka Kellner and some other undergraduates, looking at uranium mines and tourism in the Grand Canyon and the emissions caused by that and how that impacts the tribe communities there. But none of that would have happened if I stayed in that small community with the people and just absorbed their like not care for the environment. I don't know how to phrase that, but if I would have just passed that, oh yeah, I'm the odd one out here, they're right, this doesn't matter, I'm crazy, because that's how I was made to feel. But yeah, I would love to hear, because I know I'm not the only one here. We're all doing amazing things.
So I work more on like the people side of sustainability is my emphasis. So with Global Futures College Council, what our mission is to really foster a greater sense of community amongst those in CGF and to connect students with each other and with faculty to make this feel more welcome in that sense. I also work with Luminosity Lab currently to address food waste in single-use single-person households. So that has been a really interesting project. But I feel as like Arizona, like ASU has shaped this, is that I'm also not Arizona native. I'm from Maryland. And so coming here and getting this education, which is one like I couldn't have received back in Maryland, and just learning about things in class and implementing those things, seeing how the problems I hear about in class are in like the greater Phoenix community has shaped the audience that I cater towards now with the initiatives that I'm a part of. And I feel as though Arizona State has helped me with the connections that I make. A lot of the initiatives with GFCC and with Luminosity and with other things I do in the community are amongst people who go to Arizona State and connections that I've made here. So yeah, that's my answer to this question.
Yeah, I also agree with Kennedy that we're in the same space of like people. And for me, I work with Access to ASU, where I empower and like help scholarship activities with the Latino youth and providing them like just scholarships and help in any capacity that they need. I work with the 5 Latino partners within Access to ASU, and it's been really eye-opening knowing how many students, how many Latino youth are actually trying to get and break into these spaces, but because of funding, but because of a lot of these issues, they really can't get into these spaces. It's really hard and really like saddening for me to see that there are these spaces that are accessible, but not accessible to everyone. So like it's really important how we kind of shape our conversations around that. And so like learning how to do that, it's really eye-opening and important for me. I also have worked within the Sustainability Alliance within the sustainability schools. And so that's also been very important seeing how passionate students work and how students interact with each other. And we just did the Arizona University Sustainability Summit a couple months ago, and having the university help us with like getting reservations and all of that has also been very helpful and impacting, because in a time of need, the university is there and actually helps us. So like we know we have that support and capacity from the university, but it's just knowing where to add it and how to give it to students who actually need it, which for me is the most important thing on how university can help all of us today.
I think it's great to hear about all of these different activities and recognize this is really a multifaceted endeavor to how we promote sustainability. And I was just talking to someone earlier today actually about the paradox of sustainability and how, you know, in order to create something enduring and lasting, it's really about change. And that's where I focus some of my work on, specifically how do we help individuals to change behaviors, but then how can that be linked to intervention points and systems and be able to promote change in different ways. So one of the activities recently done is to develop a curriculum for use by faculty and staff here at ASU, but also student leaders on how to develop behavior change interventions to promote sustainable consumption on campus. And so working with different campus partners in university sustainability practices, other faculty and staff, we outlined this set of resources, activities, and really strategic guidelines for sort of steps that can be taken to implement change processes and use these to promote really tangible outcomes for the types of things we do here at the university. And almost position this, what we do at ASU as a living laboratory for developing and testing sustainability solutions. And I think that's one of the key values of what we have here is this is a learning environment and something that can help us to identify ways we can practice sustainability more broadly as well. And what this looks like here can be transferable to the types of things we're trying to achieve more broadly in the world as well.
Thank you. And it's so wonderful to hear how inspired everyone was by coming here and just being surrounded by sustainable thinkers. I personally had a similar experience. To start with our next question, really figuring out how we're addressing these issues in the university community and beyond. Why are diverse community partners and perspectives important in creating opportunities for learning and action among youth?
Yeah, so I think the question of diversity is when we look at these issues and we look at problem solving and how the solutions that we implement, they're going to impact everyone involved, everyone, all of the solutions we make. They're not isolated. And so for solution makers and for that decision-making process, we have to have all those stakeholders involved in the decision-making process, because if not, we're going to be missing not just information, because to get the whole perspective, you need all the perspectives there. We need everyone in their diverse worlds to come together so that we can get a better picture when we make these decisions. But if we don't have that diversity when we make our decisions, then ultimately we're just going to have to come back and like revisit. And obviously I'm a big proponent for what is it? Like adaptive management, I think is what it's called, the term for it. Learned about that through my undergraduate schooling. Yeah, adaptive management. I love that concept, and I think absolutely. But we're putting ourselves behind already if we don't have all the voices at the table, and if we don't, and not just giving them a place to sit, but actually giving them the opportunity and the confidence that they need to actually feel like their voice matters and that they want to speak at that table to make those decisions. So it's so important.
I feel like diverse opportunities are needed because they reflect the interests of youth. Because everyone, we all are here for like the common interest of sustainability, but within that, there's so many pathways and perspectives and interests. So diverse opportunities are needed to reflect that in that sense. And also having that perspectives from different angles, because these problems are complex and they touch on different subjects, aspects in our community that need to be addressed. So diversity is very important to that. And also you need diverse opportunities to widen that web, widen those connections, and to connect more people in order to get more done.
Yeah, and I agree with what both Kylie and Kennedy have said so far. But one thing I want to add is that, like, how can we create solutions and implement them if we are not including the communities that are being directly impacted by all of this? So like, it's kind of just having that conversation and including people in the table, and just having a seat at the table, and just where they can like also be part of the solution and part of like the reason why we are all doing this. I know personally for me, like growing up, I saw a lot of issues firsthand, but because I didn't have a lot of these resources or like schooling, it was really difficult to kind of like create a change or be part of that change. So like, where do people come in when it comes to like diverse communities into these conversations is something where I think we should all start at the beginning.
Yeah, I think this is a really good question. As we think about something as encompassing as sustainability, this is, relevant for all of us. And I don't think you can get a bigger sample size than planet Earth. And so we're really trying to understand, what does this mean for everyone on this planet? And but we also have to realize that the impacts of sustainability challenges aren't spread equally, and there are barriers to the types of people who are involved in communities who contribute to decision-making processes. So we need to be able to find ways to engage this and provide voices in these areas and be really intentional about it. And one of the areas I've worked in is with the Greater Phoenix Regional Center of Expertise on Education for Sustainable Development. And what we really are trying to do is, this is part of a broader network with the United Nations to try and promote quality education in formal and informal spaces related to sustainability. And one of our key target priorities is to support youth from marginalized communities to have access to quality education, to be able to learn about these topics. And I think this is really important as a key outcome of sustainability, not just being planet focused, but also people focused, and being able to create solution that goes beyond greening our communities, but really it's a social transformation as well. So I think this is at the key of how we do that.
Yeah, actually what Mauricio said reminded me of something. I think too, when we think about the climate issue, this is the first time planet Earth has, with us on it in the Anthropocene, really experienced something like this, or at least it's made to our awareness, and we're trying to take action. It's the first time. And I think, so not just, I know I talked about like diversity at the table, but just diversity problem solving and diverse solutions, because with a lot of the other, lot of issues that we come about like socially, we can look back into the history books or like the playbooks, and we can look at, okay, what's been done in the past, and how can we address this? What has been done before? What has worked? But now we are quite literally, we are writing those for the future. And I think that makes this even more difficult, but also we need to look outside the box and look at diverse solutions, because this is such a strange problem that we're experiencing that we've never had to really combat before. So there's not just a solution that's already been done that we're going to be able to implement. So just taking chances and taking different approaches to just the problem solving.
I think, like, to speak on future generations as well as past as well, I feel like there's this very special feeling that you get when you see someone who looks like you in a room and something that you're doing. It makes you motivated. It says that you can be there, you can do this too, in that sense. And I think that's very important, and diverse opportunities allow that, which is very necessary, I'd say.
Thank you for sharing. And we definitely, yeah, having diverse perspectives and being able to see that this is possible for youth, being able to see that they can make these decisions, but also youth from different backgrounds as well, is something that we definitely need to carry forward into all of our work. So since we are at a university which is focused on education and preparing youth and students to be leaders in the future, what do you feel are some of the most important skills for youth to develop as they create change related to sustainability and climate change?
I think one of the most important, and this is very reflective of me because of where I grew up and a lot of the individualized attention I was able to get in a small community. But I think confidence is really important. Being able to know, like talking about diversity and having a place at the table, youth generations are a part of that, and they deserve a place at that table in those decision making processes. And I know a lot when you're younger, and you may feel like, oh, like, what do I know? And so you don't speak up, but you need the confidence to realize that, yeah, sure, you don't know everything, but what you do think and how you do perceive the world, that is important, and other people deserve to hear that. And so by all coming together, and it may take, the youth saying something and then someone with a little bit more of expertise kind of narrowing it in and being, okay, yeah, that's really valuable, but here maybe is some more insight that you would need to know to kind of action or make that actionable. I think that is a key. Yeah, you go.
So I had three. So I was saying collaboration, resiliency, and empathy. In that sense, that sustainability solutions are very collaborative. So you're going to need to be able to work with different types of people, connect your interests, see where the differences lie, and be able to communicate beyond that. Resiliency, in the sense that these problems are very complex and wicked. And as I was saying earlier, touch on very different problems, social, environmental, and economic problems in our community. So look, the first solution is not going to work. We need to be able to adapt and work with local communities as well as global ones in order to address these issues, and also understand that we have to be resilient in that we may not see the fruition of our solutions in our lifetime. These are intergenerational problems as well. So we need to keep in the back of our mind always, like, to keep pushing in that what we're doing now will help our children and people who we may not see in, like, developing countries and stuff, who are already feeling the impacts in that sense. And empathy going along with that as well, like, especially for the students in the room, when we get in positions of power, that we can't fall in the same cycle of prioritizing or incentivizing or getting on these short-term economic benefits at the cost of future generations. In that sense, we need to have empathy for future generations, for people we can't see in that sense. So yes.
Actually, I want to touch a bit on when Kennedy talked about collaboration. I think a big one too is the growth of, like, tolerance and being able to really step and have a conversation with someone with a different viewpoint. I think that's something so lacking today. And when we look at, like, the polarization of our economy and our politics, and how sustainability is an economic, political, and social issue, the fact that it is so hard for someone, maybe on the left to have a conversation with someone on the right, that at the foundation is so detrimental for us in making progress. The fact that we cannot sit here and just listen to each other and talk to each other. Like, how are we supposed to come together and make any solution if we cannot collaborate in that way, or even just listen to each other? So I think that too, that is I really would love to see that grow among our generation. And I think that when we look at, like, a sound democracy, that without that, we are really putting ourselves behind.
Yeah, and I have to agree. I think with collaboration, there's a lot of different aspects that we have to kind of like agree on, like agree to disagree. I know in professional skills and sustainability, we learned that, like, you have to like talk to diverse amount of perspectives and, like, have different people at your table and just kind of like where are we at and like what are we doing? And like instead of like, you know, belittling them and just being like big oil is bad, you kind of have to like talk to them, figure out like solutions and all of that, and just kind of see where we are going and how we can like impact each other, and just have like that solution driven mindset instead of just being like, oh, you're bad, I'm not going to talk to you. So like we have to be open-minded, and I think that's a great skill to have as well. But we also have to be driven in that solution-based approach.
Yeah, I would echo what everyone else said. I think it's important. What we're talking about here is not that we need to know and understand things, but we need to come to see different ways of being and acting. And that's really the shift I think that needs to happen in this types of skills we gain. And so I would just reiterate the focus on collaboration, how we engage with different value sets, people, and really foster inclusion and empowerment. And I think there are two others that I'll add to this conversation. The first is I think imagination really plays a key role here, and the ability to think critically and envision something different than the trajectory we're on right now. And supporting that is, and I'll take this sort of cue from the original Earth Day, I think a lot of what motivated that was almost a lack of trust in the systems and structures and sometimes decision makers and leaders that they're going to take action and make these changes. It's up to us up here and in this room to sort of facilitate some of those. And so I think having almost a self-reliance that we can come together, some solidarity, and figure out ways to collaborate, to be inclusive and support each other, and really be able to navigate this dynamic process and have the social, emotional skills to do so, because this is really hard, challenging work. I think those things are really key for us. And we can look back to the original Earth Day and sort of think about what motivated them and how that informs the type of skills and abilities we need moving forward as well.
Thank you, guys. And to follow that question, what has been the most useful and important skill or piece of information that you have learned doing this work, and how did you learn it?
I think I wanna draw back on the confidence, because I do think when I think about my journey here in my career and within sustainability and how I've been educated, I really think back to how alone and how I thought that me caring and me having this passion about planetary health was so foreign and so abstract in where I grew up. And I know that I had like aspirations like when I was in high school, and I had projects and like things that I wanted to implement. But because I didn't have like the support system, or I didn't have anyone telling me that I was doing anything worth something, I let that fall behind, and I just I wouldn't say I gave up, but I was like, oh, put that on the back burner. I don't need to, oh, that's for another day. And then when I came here to ASU, and again, I had that support system. I had those people I could fall back on and kind of conversate with and bounce ideas back and forth, and people who actually wanted to see me succeed in what I was passionate about. It was that confidence that has helped me propel in things I do, and working with anti-poverty infrastructure in Phoenix, and volunteering, and taking the time to actually foresee that, not just have these projects come to mind, like with the Plastic Free Friday campaign I'm doing, like challenging single-use plastics. But so I had that idea, and if I were in high school, if I would have had that idea, I would have just like kind of like maybe told one of my close friends, and then they would have been like, oh yeah, that's interesting, I guess, and then would have laughed it off and never done anything about it. But in coming to ASU, and I had these ideas, and I have people backing me up and saying, oh my God, like that's a great idea, like we should, how can we make this work? It's that confidence that now every time I do go back to my hometown, I don't shut up. I don't, when people say, oh, that's weird, for you to have that perspective, or you to care about these things, I'm strong in my beliefs, and not only I'm able to articulate my perspective and have a tolerance for their perspective, and they're not understanding of the issue. So yeah, really that confidence to believe in myself, and then take that back to my community.
That's very nice. Thank you, Kylie. But for me, in the realm of collaboration, I would say the skill that I put most to use is being able to market myself, especially with getting a degree in sustainability. It's very new and people are always like, well, what is that? So being able to market myself in that way to these companies, to internships, and to people I go talk to, saying like, hey, like sustainability is important, and then it relates to your business, your field, your industry, in that sense, to get my foot in the door to create change in the sustainability aspect with them, I would say is my skill.
Yeah, and kind of just to add like a different perspective, as in like Kylie being alone, I also have to kind of agree that coming from a family where like college isn't like a real thing, and just that like people just go straight to work. And it's like being one of the first in my family to go to college, I was kind of expected to just like be a doctor, be like the best businessman that exists. And so like going into sustainability, it was kind of like a shock to my family and my mom, just being like, what is that? Like, what are you doing? What are you doing with your life? You know? So it's like being able to kind of like have to inform my family and just get them in the know about all of these issues and everything was really exciting and exhilarating for me, because like the university has provided me so many opportunities and so many like outlets for my climate action efforts. So being able to like tell my family and my friends and like all the people that I know, be like, sustainability is actually really great. And like, there's many things you can do and like many ways you can branch out within yourselves, and also marketing yourself. So it's really just like important that like, you don't just do things that you're expected because of a stereotype, but kind of just do what you want and like pursue those opportunities that you feel are necessary to bring your future out.
Yeah, everything that you all said was fantastic. And the skill I would add would be compassion. And I think part of some of the work I do is with the Global Council for Science and the Environment. And in this, we work with sustainability leaders and educators and employers around the world. And they face a lot of challenges when we have conversations with them, and it can be, we face these really sort of daunting tasks ahead and that are very pressing and urgent right now as well. And so it takes compassion for each other to be able to support ourselves in this work and build movements that can create the change that we want to see and enact these visions that we have. But also I think takes compassion for our own selves to realize the difficult positions we put ourselves in trying to do this work, and how demanding it can be, and taking a little bit of grace and understanding, and being able to move forward steadfast in this, because it's challenging. But when we work together and show compassion, I think that gives us a lot more hope and strength in what we do.
Thank you for sharing all. So finally, to close us out, what is your vision for the future of student sustainability at ASU? And how can the university support the work that students are doing now and in the future?
Yeah, so first I want to tie into something that Mauricio talked about just recently about the exhilarating field, like explaining sustainability. I know too, like getting that little light bulb to like click in some of your family members or your friends that like, oh, this is real, this is important, is such a fun feeling. And I know in my personal life, like the amount of people who like send me pictures of them bringing their reusable to a coffee shop, or my mom bringing, I don't know, like a laundry basket instead of using like grocery bags. They like always like reach out to me and they're like, oh my gosh, like I knew this would make you happy. And so I think really when we think about the future and we think about sustainability and like this really unique group of people that I found in my undergraduate who are also similarly studying this. I know obviously the future, we want it not to be such a niche group of people. We want this to be more widespread. We're not trying to gatekeep sustainability here. We want everyone to be exposed and to be passionate and to get this similar education. But I think what we're creating now are those connectors, are those people who are going back into their communities and their networks and getting that excitement out of people to say, oh yeah, like this, you care about this. Let me show you something that I'm doing that is also good for the planet. I think those little things are so fun. Also, I think that when I look at kind of the action steps that I take in my advocacy and in my kind of career in sustainability, I know that a lot of it, because I am slowly growing my fundamental knowledge of how we can govern and how we can implement solutions and those kind of things. For me, when I hear about these issues, the first thing I know to do is like take action, is to talk about it, is to reach out to people and see what can we do. Whereas when we look at like the Global Futures Laboratory, they're doing like the hard research, and I think I would love to see more of an interconnection there, because there's this huge building here that was just made. And a lot of it is for that research to make more systemic change. That is very different from what I'm doing, because I just don't have the tool sets yet to really collaborate and be involved in that. And I would love to know more about what's going on in this building, and for that to be accessible to students, so that I can say, here, this is what I'm doing. And, I'm volunteering and I'm doing these social campaigns and I'm advocating, but this is what's going on at the graduate school, and this is what they're doing. Right now I can say, except for some of the research projects I'm doing, I don't know what's going on in this huge building. What are they doing with all the things here? But I know that it's something important and it's something great and it's something that's going to make a difference. But I would love to be able to speak on that. And I would love to have the resources to know what's going on here so that I can speak about it. And when people ask me about Arizona State University, that I can say, hey, this is what I'm doing, but this is also what's going on and this is important to them.
For me on that, I was going to talk about community in that sense. My future for Arizona State has more connectivity between the students and whatnot, but also those in outside majors who even have like a remote interest in this earth and sustainability coming in and collaborating with us, because again, this is not like a gatekeeping type of situation. Like, we'd love for everyone, for it to just be marketed as more inclusive in that sense. So more students know about it. With ASU, I think what they do really great, and what they should continue doing now, is uplift students who are promoting these sustainability initiatives and actually doing things within the community and on campus. And I know ASU has initiatives currently to improve the sustainability of campus, but they can be improved in that sense, and more can be made. It's a forever progressing progress in that point. And also, like, on the side of education, I would feel a lot more in the future for improvement, and just seeing in the future more technical experience in that within the major and stuff, and also more like experiential learning in that sense, so we can have skills to get our foot in the door and be more attractive to these businesses and corporations and industries we want to work for in that sense, and be competitive.
I also agree with Kennedy on the aspect of technical courses. I'm taking an energy class right now, and it's been very, very difficult, but like it's also very like enlightening, and also like I want to do this. So like just learning how to like get more technical, and like instead of me having to like reach out to outside organizations about getting like this technical skills, ASU can provide me with those skills, especially in sustainability. And I know that like a lot of these opportunities are like, oh, you have to be an engineering major, you have to have these skills already. It's like, I would really love to see in the future a lot more like connectivity and access for that. I also know that ASU has like a really great connection with sustainability and commitment already. So just seeing how that can further with the youth as well, like having like funding opportunities to go to these conferences, or like just having like these other opportunities where youth can like be ASU level like leaders in their communities as well, or just having like these opportunities where they can like go to the global stage and just have to like talk about their experiences as well, just being able to be like a representative as well, because ASU already has like a lot of organizations that are like global level. So how can we get students to also be part of that level and be part of that stage as well? What I think is like a future for ASU, I think will just look great and just be helpful for everyone.
Yeah, I think there are a lot of great things going on here that really set a good trajectory for moving forward. I think a couple of things I want to highlight there are really inspired by a quote I like by John Dewey, who's the educational philosopher, who said, education is not preparation for life, education is life itself. And I think I take that as meaning that, we have to have this training aspect of what we do here at ASU to develop this knowledge and skills that we need. But I think there also is this very applied experiential part that we brought up of supporting youth and students to take action and be able to realize the visions that they have now currently in the present and be able to implement those. And so I think that means moving forward more empowerment and agency for students, enabling them to contribute to decision-making processes, and really putting the sort of resources and institutional weight behind the ideas that they have and setting up structures that support them. Because as a student, when you're here for a couple of years, that sort of continuity and being able to see things through can be really difficult. That's where at an institutional level, some of the resources and structures to be put in place can help to make that happen and make it so that the changes we want to see don't happen 4 years after the degree is reached, but can be happening now, because we also need that here at ASU and in our local communities as well.
Amazing. And I lied. I have one more question for you all, and then we can open up to a quick Q&A. So what is one thing that everyone in the audience here can do today or in the future to support student change makers in sustainability?
When people ask me kind of what can people do right now to kind of help in sustainability, I always play on the concept of just being mindful. It's like you don't have to, which I know is not necessarily the scope of the question, but you don't have to be perfect right now, and you don't have to change all of your habits and be this perfect hippie that is just able to live off the land and just do their own thing. Like, you don't have to do that today. You don't even have to get there eventually, but it's the idea that we're being mindful of our decision making. And at least when we're making our decisions, we can say like, yes, this is why I'm making this decision. And like, these are the implications of that. I think having that mindfulness is so important. And I think in helping us as students, I think just again, just having that mindfulness, because we're all working towards the same goal. Like, all of us here, like we want the planet to be healthful, and we want it to flourish, and we want it to give us the sustenance that we need and the beauty that we need to really maintain just a really sound well-being. That's what we want. We're all here for that. So to support me, you need to support that goal, and you need to take those mindful actions. And I really think that I would be pleased. You don't even have to talk to me, just mentally you're being mindful, and you can know that I'm happy for that. You're supporting me.
For me, it would be to be encouraging and uplifting in that sense, and to broaden your circle in that sense. So basically what I mean by that is to tell people about these opportunities. And if you think they'd be a good fit for something, tell them about it. Or if they have an idea, but they seem unsure, like uplift them and be like, no, your idea matters. You should pursue that in that sense. I feel we all feed off of each other in that sense. Not, why do I keep saying in that sense? But we all feed off each other. And what Kylie was saying, like with that support system, we can be each other's support system. And for the students in the room, a lot of you all I know are in sustainability in that. But basically, if you know students in other majors or even in sustainability who want to come out and support and be in these clubs and have programs and whatnot, your idea matters. So please encourage them to come out into these spaces.
Yeah, actually, that brought up a good point. I think I'm not sure how it works on like the faculty level, and like how, CGF faculty may interact with like WP Carey or like the Fulton School. But I just recently attended an event that was like, it was ran by WP Carey, but like they also tried to like entice CGF students to also come. And when I went to that event, I just thought like, why are we not doing more of this? And I think that faculty, if that relationship is lacking between faculty, which I can't speak on if it is or if it isn't. But faculty to build on that themselves, and then also to foster that between the students too, because like Kennedy was saying, and like we've all touched on, sustainability is not just a sustainability thing, it's not just a CGF thing, but it's for all of us. And so I would love to see more events and more things catered to fostering that connection together between the schools and between the diverse groups of students.
I think it's really important to take that approach. And I really love what Kylie and Kennedy have said, but to take a different approach, we do have a rally at 1 or at 12 to 1 p.m. where we hear about passionate students and their experiences and background within Earth Day and like environmental issues. So like if you want to support students who are also trying to get into these spaces, it's going to be at the Student Services lawn from 12 to 1. And then we have a march after from 1 to 2 p.m. where we march for Earth Day and just like a celebration, just showcasing that like there are students involved and that we have people in capacity that we can like do this. So if you want to come, Student Services building from 12 to 2 p.m. and we'll be there, I'll be there. So if you want someone to be there, I'll be there. But yeah, if you want to take action today.
That's certainly the practical thing to do. And that's the personal thing that I would encourage everyone to do is to think about your why and why are you doing this type of work, or have the goals that you do. And for the students in the room, I would encourage us all to dedicate ourselves to that why and sort of envision how we can go about achieving those goals and put ourselves on that pathway. And for everyone else in the room, I would encourage you to think about the why that you had when you started to get into work around sustainability and how that's carried through to what you do now. And think about the support that you received along the way from great mentors or peers, whoever it might have been. And think about the support that you didn't receive and that you wish you would have had that might have helped you achieve a greater impact or get to the point you are now more efficiently. And think about how you can offer some of that support to the students in the room and those here at ASU and beyond. And go up to someone, have a conversation with the student and ask them about their why and think about how you can support them.
Perfect. So we might have time for 1 to 2 Q&A. So if anyone has a question, I see hand up the back and then up at the front.
Great. Sorry. Great talk. And clearly this is very important. But one thing I'm wondering is, what do you think going forward are some of the things we might have to quote unquote give up or reform or reevaluate, right? Because we can talk about the need, but one constant thing I keep hearing people ask is, what's it going to cost me now? Which is exasperating, and a great way to derail the conversation. But what are some of the things that come to mind when you think of that? When you think of that, and how would you sort of try to get people to change their minds about the cost, if you will?
I can take that. For me, thinking about that question, it's a lot of having to reevaluate your habits and values in that sense. A lot of, especially us in the United States, a lot of our energy and just things we spend money on are not for basic needs. Like we do a lot of recreational and we spend a lot of energy, resources and whatnot to upkeep recreational facilities and whatnot. So I think we really do need to rethink what is important, what is necessary in that sense, and what is a little too unnecessary. And with my work with Luminosity on decreasing food waste in single-use households, a lot of these grocery stores and whatnot are having this problem with people who don't need 20 oranges in a bag or like need more like individual size quantities of things. So really rethinking the way we go about doing things in our current culture and reducing in that sense.
No, I love that question. I love that you asked that because I really am a strong advocate for what we need to give up in the developed nations is a lot. is truthfully a lot. A lot of our emissions and a lot of our consumption comes from luxury expenditures, and we really need to reevaluate our culture here in the US and just in developed nations in general, and think about, do I really need 15 pairs of shoes? Do I really need to buy that shirt that my friend just bought because it looks good on her, it'll look good on me, we can rock it together? Like, no, you don't. We don't. And when we think about global issues, and we think about how developing nations are struggling so severely, and then we bring that into perspective here, there is a lot of opportunity for us to give up some things that may be hard for us relatively, because this is our culture. And even if there are some rooms for improvement, like that is the truth. It's our culture, and we can't just change it like that, and it's going to be hard, but there is room for us to grow, and there is room for us to cut down.
Just really quickly, I really liked what Amber said in our first talk about prestige as being a driver of behavior change. And I would just say maybe the thing we can give up, though, is prestige and seeking that. Why can't we take a radical approach here and think critically about this and search for other things that give us meaning and fulfillment instead of these external drivers?
I'll make this more of a comment because I think we're out of time, but this whole conversation has reminded me I was at the 20th anniversary of Earth Day when I was a freshman in college, Washington, D.C., 350,000 people marched, great concert by the Indigo Girls, if everybody remembers them. Then 2 years ago, Chris Boone, sitting back here, former dean of the School of Sustainability, and I marched in the Fridays for the Future event in Glasgow at the COP27. And I just wanted to say, Mauricio, keep marching. That's the thing, is just don't give up. I really appreciate your leadership and your enthusiasm and your passion now, but you've got to hang on to that because, we need you not just as youth leaders, but we need you throughout your whole lifetime to help address these challenges.
Thank you. So we are out of time, but please join me in thanking our wonderful panelists for all the work that they've been doing at the university and will continue to do, and hopefully throughout their lifetimes. So thank you all.
All right, I think we are ready for the last segment of this morning's celebration. And that is, we will have up next Manfred Laubichler and Chelsea Dixon with their session, Be a Future Energy Policymaker. It's an interactive experience that will demonstrate the critical connections between science and decision-making. And you would, of course, expect that, them being from the decision theater, heavily involved in the decision theater. And we often say that we are living in the decisive decade where the changes that we make, or the decisions that we make today, will have impact for years, decades, probably hundreds of years to come. And we have brought ourselves in that position because we have not made these decisions when they would have been easier to make. So to make these pivots in our decision making, we must provide decision makers with the best science. We always say that, that's part of our mission. And but it has to come not just through our journal, through the typical ways that we are using to do that, but in a format that is easily and immediately usable for them. And we will see that in action today. And in order to be part of that action, make sure that you have your mobile phones ready as we are going through that session. Short introduction. Manfred Laubichler is Global Futures Professor and President's Professor of Theoretical Biology and History of Biology, Director of the School of Complex Adaptive Systems, and Chief Scientist of the Decision Theater here at Arizona State University. His work focuses on evolutionary novelties, from genomes to knowledge systems, the structure of evolutionary theory, and the evolution of knowledge. Chelsea Dixon is the Assistant Director of Decision Theater and a PhD student in human and social dimensions and science and technology. She's passionate about building bridges between knowledge holders and decision makers. In her work, she explores methods for connecting research, policy, communities, and industry to empower collaboration to address complex issues facing society today. So please welcome Manfred and Chelsea.
Thank you very much. And thank you to everyone who has already joined our app. I loved what Amber said earlier today of when she went into the decision theater. It was like being in a spaceship. This is our attempt to bring the spaceship to you and invite you along in the journey. So at different points, you'll be asked different questions, and that will actually impact kind of the direction we take with the model and the presentation today. So please go ahead and take a minute. And we'll go ahead and get started. So first question, we're going to be looking at a energy model today, specifically around where a solar power plant should be built in Arizona. So to just kind of get us started thinking that direction, what do you think is the current total statewide energy consumption in Arizona per year? And you can go ahead and say what you think it is now. And this is where our votes landed up. The correct answer, which actually won, is 1,508 trillion BTU. So that actually amounts to 210 per capita. And what's interesting about that is that total number, we rank 25th in the nation for energy consumption, so about halfway. But our per capita, we go down to 40th. So we're actually using a lot less per capita in this state. So next question. How much of Arizona's annual energy is produced by solar? So we have a lot of people thinking 20 to 25, but the correct answer is B at 9% at the most recent count. And this makes us in the top 5 in the nation. We kind of rotate, but it's usually around number 5. Next up. Now this one's more, there's no right and wrongs here. If you had to pick what you think might be the main drawback to why we aren't producing more of our energy via solar, what do you think that is in 3 words or less? You can go ahead and submit an answer as it comes to you, and then you'll see the answers other people have put, and you can vote on those as well. The more votes something gets, the larger it will appear on our little word cloud here. So politics, cost, infrastructure costs for sure. All right, we'll go ahead and move on to the next one. To wrap us up for this little intro, at this specific moment, how would you rate your current understanding of what's required for a solar power plant and where to choose a location to build one? And the average response is fair, 2.8, a little below average. We have an impressive group of people in this room. And we can get started showing you the map in the middle here. There's going to be a map that shows up in the middle. It'll be a state map of Arizona with 6 different locations labeled. So I want you, without having seen the full details of the model, to pick which of these 6 locations you would choose as the best location for a solar power plant. I'm going to advance it one more. Oh, there we go. So now using the map in the center, you can see which is A, B, C, D, E, and F, and take your vote. And this is actually what we will run through the model. Whatever the crowd selects, we will be doing the top 2 and see how they compare. All right, E is a solid winner. Manfred will be very excited about that. And the second place is F. So we will go ahead and get started showing you the actual model screens.
Problem that we have for the energy side of that we are dealing with highly complex problems. And so we heard it in the panel this morning. We heard it from our students. Everybody wants to be engaged. Everybody wants to do the right thing. The question is, what do we need to know to have an informed decision about those complex problems that we are dealing with? One way of getting at that is sort of the mission of the decisions theater at ASU, which is now part of GFL, and that is to actually find ways to represent the complexity through models and through those interactive experiences that we are trying here to initiate a process of decision-making that moves us down a path towards solutions that allow us to exist on this planet in a sustained way. So now we don't have time to go through all of those questions here. And in a way, the solar energy is a complex problem, but it's still a very tractable problem because the physics is easy. The social demand, the component is not so easy. What you see here are some of the scenarios that go into the underlying technology that has to do with what do you actually need in terms of transmission lines, contingencies, if we make a transition to renewable energies, who provides the backup to solar, whether that's gas or nuclear or something else. Several components like this. It gives us then technology options that as technology advances continue to change. So those models that we are building in the decisions theater need to continuously be updated based on where we are. And then it has some basic information about the energy profile, peak day energy demand and things like that, that we can sort of ignore for the time being, but that when you really want to get into the complexities of the decision-making process are extremely relevant to affect our decisions. So what we want to do now is go through the two top choices that you picked and see what we have in our decision support system that might help us influence decisions about where to put the solar plant in Arizona. Because as you have seen, we only use 9% currently in a state that has as much sun as Arizona. That's sort of ridiculous. So in a way, we need to not just invest in rooftop solar, which is the kind of localized decision, but also more infrastructure investments. And solar plants would be those types of investments. And the question is where to put it. And then several additional factors come in because it's not so easy to put a solar plant somewhere because somebody will be upset, either because they don't like it or there is a transmission line that has to run through their backyard or some of the other factors that we can see here.
So these are the main three screens we're going to be comparing as we go through the two scenarios that we're actually going to run. So you get some location information over here on the left. Of particular interest is the slope. The slope of the land has a lot to do with if it's possible to put solar panels there and how effective they would be if you did. Another interesting one is the endangered species at the bottom. It tells you any animals that would be impacted by that, and then actually their rank. So it's kind of tiny, but it'll say like 1A, 1B, 1C, that kind of a thing. And basically anything that's a 1A is just a no-go. That's not going to be possible at all. And then in the middle, we have land ownership breakdown, water planning, economic interests, environment, and then above my head, you see production and usage. So how much it could produce, but then also how much of that could actually make it to a place where it could be utilized. And then water requirements to operate, that kind of thing. This is just kind of a brief tour. We'll dig into the details when we actually run the scenario. And then there's one more screen that they'll advance in the middle here, and that's our transmission line map. And it shows where the plant would connect to our existing transmission grid infrastructure. So this is just an example. Whenever you see this map, the tiny little red dot is where the plant we picked would be. And then it shows you how it connects into everything else. And spoiler, anytime you see a red circle like that, it means that the grid is overloaded and it wouldn't be able to handle it. That won't appear in all the scenarios, but when you see it, that's what that means. So then we're going to go ahead and ask you another question real quick, so you can get out your phones again. When you picked that original location, F at being our top winner, E being our second, what was the main reason that you had in your mind for why you thought that might be a good location? And again, you can enter a response and then you can vote for others. So a lot to do with space and open land. And then we'll go ahead and move on to the next question here. Go one more. Yes, no, you're good. And so of the screens that we just overviewed, we went over kind of a lot of broad categories. What were you surprised to see included? What wouldn't you have normally thought would enter the conversation about, we need to build a solar plant, where should we put it? Endangered species, a big one. Slope. Okay, wonderful. We'll go ahead and move in and dive into our first location. And our top location was E, right? E. And we'll jump there. And then on the center map, you'll see where we actually drew the polygon, and you'll get to kind of see the real size of it relative to the rest of the map. There we go. And it's right in our lovely Air Force range. So let's see what the model shows when we bring up the main three screens.
So if you look at some of the screens that might influence our decision, let's start with the ideal location. If you see production and usable production match. So in terms of that would be a great location for a solar plant, because you can pretty much use everything that is available right now. Then there is an interesting thing about Arizona use and export use. This has something to do with the way the grid needs to be balanced. So it's also very evenly split at this location. We don't have to get into the economics and the environment right now, because that's also very complex categories. But then we have an interesting question. So if you look at the endangered species, it's also an ideal location. There is no 1A species on that list. There's one snake there, and question, or two snakes actually there. So the question is how you relate to those. So if you don't like snakes, who cares? But there is the big problem with that location. Who owns the land? The military. And they like their land because they want to bomb things and do other things that the military does. So now we have an interesting challenge. So if this becomes a policy debate, for instance, about the boundaries of the Goldwater bombing range in the Air Force, does the need of national security balance out the need for an ideal location for renewable energy? And how would we navigate those challenges? So in that sense, what that tool illustrates here right away is where the conflict is, where there is the potential conflict that needs to be addressed, and how are we potentially addressing that if we want to actually advance the energy transition in Arizona. You can go to the military, show them that site and say this would be an ideal site from anybody, all other considerations. And they might say, okay, but it's ours. So then it becomes an interesting question of how societal will and societal decision-making will have to play out in this context. Are there any immediate questions right now? Yeah.
While I think that the point of the military owning the land could potentially be a problem, I think that may not be the real problem. The military is one of the largest energy users in the country. They own extensive independent energy sources. They're required to have 2 weeks of power on site if ever they had to disconnect from the grid. It's easy to convince the military of this. The problem, I think, would lie with economics. And I think that who would pay for a system that size is where the problem lies. And that's mostly, I think, there's been a big problem in energy policy debates for a long time.
But that's an important point. I mean, we could delve into the economics, but some of the data there that we have in that current system are no longer quite accurate. So that would have to be revisited. Is it economically feasible? Particularly, is it economically feasible projecting into the future of the benefits that you would reap? But that's a really an interesting intervention about how one could approach the military. Say, hey, you guys have a problem. You use a lot of energy. You should create your own energy resources in a renewable way. If you carve out a few acres, or some more than a few acres from your huge reservation down there, so would that actually be a good compromise? So this is exactly the kind of discussions that can be triggered by deploying such a decision support system in the context of energy transitions.
And that's actually a perfect example, because these tools aren't meant to make the decision for anyone, in the sense that it's also not supposed to rule anything out off the get-go or say anything's the particular right answer. Our intention is for them to be tools for conversation and figuring out what the opportunities or challenges might be. And hopefully having someone in the room that says something like that is like, oh, well, I know how to try and make this case to the military of how this could still be a worthwhile location, mitigate some of the risks that come up in different categories of this model. These aren't made as the decision maker. They're made to help inform and assist the decision makers and the people in the discussion.
Sally.
This is my comment is also on the military. So what happens is we put a sort of state decision into federal hands in a way. And just today, President Biden is signing a new executive order about accountability of all branches of the government and all agencies for sustainable goals. And so I think that's another advantage to this particular moment in having some sort of conversation with the military.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, yeah, I think those are the changing societal contexts that then shift the conversations based on what this type of models can provide in terms of some basic underlying facts that need to be on the table in order to make those complex decisions. And if you sort of jump to the morning session again and the new water initiative, I mean, we have to build lots of tools like that for water issues moving into the future for exactly that same question. And as there's the discussion about what should actually guide the allocation of the Colorado River in the future, that will inform those kind of decisions.
Can we go ahead and get the transmission map up as well, just so we can see that aspect of the model? So again, the little red dot is the plant that we were discussing, and you can see the arrow of where it would connect into the existing grid. And this one does not have any of the orange or red kind of warning signs, so it would not be an overload on the system.
Yeah, so it actually gets right into a transmission line that connects Arizona to San Diego, and that's a very powerful transition line. So very little needed in terms of additional infrastructure investment in that location.
All right, so now it's time to see
Yes.
what you thought about it. If we'll
Go ahead. We have one more question.
So as a humanist, this is just a general comment. I don't even actually know how to phrase it. But so I'll just look at the land ownership breakdown. The bombing range is actually located on Otham lands. And so it just seems to me that one of the sort of things that's not accounted for in any of these graphs are humanities kinds of issues like history. And so when we think about who owns the land, it says military and private, but actually if you think about the fact that the Otham people originally owned that, then where do we account for, I'm sure somewhere on these graphs, you probably do account for indigenous land sovereignty. So maybe you could just tell me where or if that's accounted for.
As far as land sovereignty goes, you're only seeing two categories right now because those are the only two within the polygon we drew for this particular plant. Other polygons could have up to like 6 different types of land ownership, and tribal sovereignty is one of those slivers that would appear if we drew it somewhere that is relevant. That is. Mm-hmm.
But another point that you bring up, and that is what is our intention with this type of models and this engagements with communities, is that's an iterative process. So if something that's not yet in there, because we haven't thought about it, quite frankly, or we thought it wasn't particularly relevant, if it becomes relevant, it can be added and the models get expanded or transformed. That's the purpose of those continuous engagements within that decisions here, the framework.
So some of you are already responding to the question, what do you see as a pro for choosing this location? And then we'll go ahead and move to the next question of what appears to be a con to choosing this location. Snake deaths. That's great.
So somebody has a realistic assessment that the military doesn't know where to aim their bombs.
And we'll go ahead and jump to the next question. So at the end of the day, do you think this would be a good place to build a solar power plant? Probably 3.8 out of 5. That's probably a good one. All right. And we'll jump into the next model. I think you can, yeah. So moving on to location E was this, F. F was the second one. Thank you. And I think if we progress it one more, we'll get to see so you see it up there, kind of near Safford as the closest big city, close to the border of the counties. And we'll progress it one more time to see what the model tells us about this place.
Okay, so if we sort of look again at where we are here and we start with our production usage summary, we see this is not an ideal location because, we drew sort of equal size power plants. So the peak production is very close to what it was before. But the usable production is about half of it. So That doesn't rule it out because it just means that there would be additional infrastructure investments needed to actually turn that into an optimal location from the point of view of production and usage. You look at the land ownership breakdown. It's between state trust and Bureau of Land Management and a little private thrown in for good measure. So you have three entities that one has to deal with at that location. One could say two of them might be sort of government ones that might be easier to deal with or not, depending on the local politics. But that clearly is an issue to consider. To Joni's question, again, no tribal ownership in that area. But then looking at the affected species, that looks a little more touchy here. First of all, more there. And we have at least one that is not a C, but a B, the desert box turtle. So it just shows the complexity about when we have this complex transformations of our society and of our relationship to the environment, that we often have different considerations that might be in conflict with each other. And so that would have to be negotiated in a specific way. And at the minimum, it would require to have not just letting the engineers run amok here and design a power plant, but to have, you have to get more additional stakeholders into the design phase of that plant. How can a solution be found with all the endangered species at that location, for instance? So this is where we get with this kind of location. So if you go to the questions.
The transmission map, if we can get that up real quick, just to double check that part. So this one, we do run into red bubbles. And you might not be able to read it from where you're at, but the one on the right says we're at 131% capacity on that line. The one on the bottom left is 100%. So similar to his point before about not having a high usage percentage of what is actually produced, a location here would require significant investment in the infrastructure around it to even make it beneficial.
But sort of when we look here just at Arizona, so if you then think about this in a broader picture and you move one state over to New Mexico, where there are a lot of discussions with wind farms, because they have a lot of wind and not a lot of people. So that discussion relies heavily on the need of infrastructure investments, of getting wind energy from New Mexico or even from Texas to the population centers. That means Arizona and then on to California. So if we take that into consideration, that there needs to be a new transmission line coming from New Mexico going west, then that might change the evaluation of this location again.
So some of you are already responding to what you think the pros of this location are. Big focus on the fact that the land ownership would be a different type of conversation, perhaps a little easier. I'm trying to see what else is there. Slope. And if we move on to the next question, we'll get to what appears to be the con of this location. The poor turtles. And yes, definitely the transmission grid. All right, so ultimately, what do you think about this location? Next question. Do you think that this is a good place to build our solar power plant? Probably not. Between the two, maybe we're looking at preferring a conversation with the military about convincing them why it would be such a great place. You know, at the end of the day, it wouldn't be a choice between just two. But for today, maybe that's the direction we want to go. And then if you want to.
Yes, Lauren.
So between the first and second, this one's a little straightforward at this point, I think, but which location would you choose between the two? If you had to choose between the pros and cons from your perspective, what you thought was most important?
Can I ask a question? Sorry. Do we know anything about where that existing capacity is coming from and how it might change in the future? Because that might tell us something about whether or not it's the right choice. Yeah, so if that's coming from coal generation and the plant's going to be closed in the next 10 years, maybe we might look at availability on the transmission lines and think it might be worth it.
Good question. I don't think we have that in the model yet. So that's one of the things that one needs to sort of assess, get the data and build into the model in terms of future projections. So this is exactly the kind of feedback that those engagements need to produce.
We have total consensus. How often does that happen? All right, so first location it is. You can go ahead and move forward. To elaborate on your question a little bit, the solar energy production at 9% for the state of Arizona is more than all of the other renewable energies combined. So it's a fair bet to say that what's overloading the transmission line is non-renewable sources of energy. We don't have it currently built into the model of exactly how the distribution is split on any particular part of the system. But it's a pretty safe bet that it's non-renewables.
Well, there are then additional technical issues. You could say, why don't we build one exactly where the coal plants are that we want to shut down because they have already transmission lines. But the grid is a delicate animal with solar because the sun doesn't shine 24 hours. So that has a lot of issues with where you put it and then how to balance the grid. I mean, if you really go into the deciding phase, those are additional considerations that need to be taken into account. That it's in one of the screens that we had up before where you could actually change some of the scenarios, and that one of the selection is what do you need as a backup to the solar plant in order to stabilize the grid 24 hours. So those are issues that then come into considerations that we don't have the time now to play with here, but they are already in. Yes.
Well, this is a neat model, and it sounds like it's even more advanced than we got to see today. And I think I've heard that it was actually developed for real world use. So how is what we did today different from what how it was designed for an actual utility site location?
So one piece that comes to mind is the first two panels we showed you at the beginning that we kind of said these exist, but we won't be playing with them today. Provide a lot of different options for how that plant is actually constructed, what type of policies exist around different forms of energy and different forms of construction techniques and that kind of thing. There was a lot of different customization options in that panel that we haven't played with as much, that were a bigger part of the original conversation, and get more to changing different policy and technology pieces. We kind of kept those static for the sake of today to just run a couple scenarios through location wise.
And we would have to update those right now because of the geopolitical consideration of where do you get the solar panels from? Because that might be with supply chains and the ability to procure those pieces of technology in a way that we deem desirable is something that's not yet in the model, but that needs to be put in for any future application.
Was this model designed just for solar? Did they take into account environmental issues throughout every source of energy? That makes sense?
I think I know what you're talking about. If you guys can go back one on the center screen where the environmental column showed up again on, yeah. So this, I think, might get to what you're talking about, where it combined the environmental impact of different energy producing options to show where the plant we're talking about would impact compared to other energy options. Is that?
Yes, you're going down but the energy and the environmental impact on the front end of making the panels, and then the disposal part on the back end when they've reached their life cycle. So was this designed strictly for a panel place, or did they take all that into for the placement of these solar panels, or did they take the other part into consideration?
I don't think the construction of the materials themselves was included in the calculation of the environmental impact. I could be wrong.
Thank you.
I don't.
So this is another one of those issues that if you really sort of, because this was looking at the economics in terms of energy generation, and then the input primarily in terms of water, CO2, endangered species, and the issues that we discussed. If you say, but we also need to sort of factor in the whole life cycle and supply chain issues, then that adds another category that will change the economics. And so, instance, some of the economics that we have here, of course, operates with an assumption of a certain price for CO2. So if you add that, change that, then all those economics parameters will change. So this is a very fluid situation where additional information needs to constantly brought up, and those conversations that we're having right now are the kind of conversations that we hope will provide information from stakeholders and from the concerned public about what we all need to consider before we make an informed decision.
So I realized I didn't say this before, but I think this is great. Thank you for creating this and just learning that it's supposed to be used for real life situations makes it just wonderful and very help policymakers in making decisions. I just wanted to comment a little bit on this scenario because I don't think it's very bad in the sense of the land ownership state trust. Because I believe, and I may be wrong, that in Arizona, land is held in trust for the children. So if that land is making money, that money could fund the universities that we're actually in right now for generations to come. So that part information might have been missing. So this might be a better option long-term when it comes to state development. I don't think you can put a number on the amount of kids that will be educated from the revenue from a project of that size.
So I think it's another important point, what to do with this state trust land that supposedly funds future generations is putting it to use for energy production, a valuable option for that rather than selling it to developers. And that's an interesting question.
Great. Thank you both for the demonstration. And here we're doing sort of an exploratory approach where you're asking us to look at some options and then evaluate the criteria. One of the other uses of these types of complex systems models, as you know, would be essentially the opposite, right? Doing a multi-objective parameter analysis and saying, okay, what is important to us is to avoid areas with endangered species, to find the exact slope, to find the solar potential, to select and prioritize certain land ownership types. Can you and could you run this model by saying, these are all the priorities, these are the parameters we want, and now the output is show us the exact portfolio of high priority available lands that meet all of the critical criteria that would allow us to do large scale solar installation?
Yes, but then it wouldn't be interactive.
And actually, if we could get the transmission map screen back up again. So that's actually what the teal and pink bubbles are. Spoiler. These completely change again based on the first screen of options, based on what you do tell it that your priorities are, what values you want it to prioritize above others when it comes to, is it a land ownership thing? Is it an endangered species thing? Is it economic value? you can get it to essentially optimize for different perspectives. And that's what the teal and pink bubbles are.
Thank you. This is really useful. I'm just curious moving forward. So you said at the beginning that this is now part of GFL. And I'm wondering, there's many faculty and students and centers represented here. How would one interact with the decision theater? Like, how would you bring it on a project, a grant? Like, how do you think we should be engaging with you?
Well, this is sort of a brief statement about the motivation of what we did over the last year, basically transitioned the decision theater into an ASU, but also primarily also a GFL facility. And this is exactly to allow for this. And there will be more announcements coming to the whole GFL community about the opportunities of the decision theater exists. This is what it can do. This is how you can get engaged. And we would welcome any proposal and project that is generated throughout the GFL community and beyond to bring to us, and we can work and sort of put it into motion. And in a way, it's the strategic question of how does GFL deliver on its central category of we need to shape societal will, because that's what this is all about. How do we make collective decisions that advance humanity in that sense? Yeah. And so if you bring up the last slide, because this has something to do with another initiative that is connected to what we told you about, or what do you think?
We already answered that.
We already did that. And that is sort of another one where we are currently in conversations with the design school, because this is sort of what we showed you right now is a very technocratic approach, but there are more interesting design challenges, and we are establishing a link between the design school and GFL along those lines. That's just an announcement. Peter.
All right, so if you wouldn't mind answering one final question, just so we can wrap it up, after having gone through this exercise, similar to the question we asked at the beginning, how much more acquainted are you? How much more do you understand solar power plants and what to consider when you're choosing one? And then we'll click forward to the next question. I think it's the last one. Yes. So basically, would a tool like this be helpful? And do you feel like you would be more equipped to have a conversation about solar power plants if everyone at the table had something like this to refer back to facilitate that conversation? And I think that's it.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you all for participating.
Well, thank you, Chelsea and Manfred. That brings us to the end of our Earth Day celebration. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. It was a great sequence. We heard from real decision-making, from actions that are in the pipeline that are being announced shortly by the governor. We had a great panel on how you can think about water. That will be continued on Tuesday with the launch of AWII. We heard from the young voices, and for us, I think two things that I took away from that is, as school directors, as leaders of centers, etc., make sure that you bring the students to everything that's done within that building and beyond. Actually, it's not just that building, but I'm not sure how many students are still here. I would like to encourage students to just walk through that building, because it is open. Everybody is really willing to talk to you about what is being done and how you can get involved. So I think it's a two-way process here, and it's maybe also a good way to transition from living in the virtual world to coming and see what's actually being done in these buildings. And then the final segment that we just saw hopefully gave you a sense of how, not that you didn't know, but it is a complex, everything we touch is complex. And especially decision-making is very complex because human elements are coming into it. But it also was hopefully gave you a bit of a glimpse into what can be done to have these conversations. And I hope you saw during that very short exchange here how the outcomes can be changed by input from people who have never seen that before, who bring in different perspectives, for example, about military ownership versus other ownership, about where is the power going, how are transmission lines being used now, how might they be repurposed, etc. And that, you know, energy is just one example. This can be used for so many other things. Could even be used about how the ocean is being used in the future. So really great to end with that interactive piece. And with that, I hope you continue to participate in whichever event you choose. There are many around here to celebrate Earth Day. And we will see hopefully many of you, if not all of you, on Tuesday. And then the sequence of next events will be announced. Thank you everybody for participating.